Alright, let's open the right page. Zone Rouge, France. Running through the Marne, Meuse, and Aisne departments of northeastern France is a network of land parcels collectively designated Zone Rouge. The Red Zone, officially classified as uninhabitable under French law and closed to permanent settlement and agriculture. The Zone Rouge is the legacy of the Western Front, specifically the result of what happened when 9 million artillery shells were fired across a relatively narrow strip of agricultural land over 4 years of industrial warfare. Military historians estimate that approximately 30% of all shells fired during World War I failed to detonate on impact. They remain in the soil, distributed through the root zone and subsoil of fields, forests, and former villages across several thousand hectares of French territory. French authorities estimate the total number of unexploded shells still in the ground at a minimum of 12 million. Many are standard high-explosive rounds. Steel casings containing TNT, or picric acid, corroded over a century but often still structurally intact around a live charge. A significant portion are chemical weapons, mustard gas shells, phosgene canisters, lewisite rounds. These are not neutralized by time. The sulfur mustard in century-old shells retrieved from Zone Rouge fields still tests active. The chemical agents are protected from the worst of the environmental exposure by their corroding steel casings, corrosion that simultaneously makes them more fragile and more dangerous to handle. A dedicated French government unit called the Département du Déménage, the National Explosive Ordnance Disposal Service, recovers approximately 900 tons of World War I ordnance from French soil every year. Farmers encounter shells in their fields every spring when the plow reaches down to where last autumn's rain has shifted something upward. The process is called the iron harvest. Every year, on average, several members of the Département de Déménage are killed or injured during disposal operations. The French government's internal assessment of full clearance for the most contaminated areas estimates 300 to 700 years at current recovery rates. Lake Natron, Tanzania. Lake Natron sits in a shallow tectonic basin in the East African Rift System, in northern Tanzania, fed by hot springs drawing water through volcanic rock saturated with sodium carbonate and trona, a sodium bicarbonate carbonate mineral, from the active volcanic geology of the rift zone below. The result is a lake with a pH consistently measured between 10 and 10.5, roughly equivalent to household ammonia, and surface temperatures near the hydrothermal spring inlets reaching 60 degrees Celsius. The water is colored in shades of blood red, rust orange, and deep pink by massive blooms of halophilic cyanobacteria, microorganisms that synthesize red-orange carotenoid pigments as part of their metabolism in the extreme chemical environment, thriving in conditions that are lethal to virtually all other living things. Most animals that enter the lake and cannot immediately exit are killed. The caustic solution rapidly destroys mucosal tissues. The heat accelerates the chemical damage, and the carcasses are then mineralized by the sodium carbonate chemistry, coated in a hardening deposit that preserves them in precise anatomical detail. The calcified remains accumulate on the shoreline. Photographer Nick Brandt documented dozens of them in 2013. Birds and bats preserved mid-posture in sodium carbonate casings, frozen at the moment the lake claimed them. The exception is the lesser flamingo. Lake Natron hosts over 75% of the world's entire lesser flamingo breeding population, which nests on small mineral islands that form in the shallows from carbonate precipitation during the dry season. Flamingo chicks grow thick protective scale armor on their legs and feet during the critical post-hatching period that allows them to walk across terrain that would strip the skin from virtually any other vertebrate. The lake's extreme chemistry protects the nesting colony by making the approach lethal to almost every land predator. The caustic environment that kills everything else creates the safety condition the flamingos depend on entirely. Lake Nyos, Cameroon. On the evening of August 21, 1986, a lake in the Oki volcanic field of northwestern Cameroon released approximately 1.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide in a matter of minutes and killed roughly 800 people and 3,500 livestock within a radius of 25 kilometers without any conventional warning, without any sound most survivors described as alarming, and without leaving any physical marks on the bodies. Lake Nyos sits in a mare, a low-relief volcanic crater formed by a groundwater contact explosion, and rests above a magmatic intrusion that has been degassing CO2 into the lake's deep water for an unknown geological period. The gas dissolved under the hydrostatic pressure of the overlying water column, accumulating in the deep layers at concentrations that the pressure kept in solution. On August 21, a disturbance, the leading hypothesis is a small landslide on the lake's northern wall. Though Friedic gas eruption from below cannot be excluded, disturbed the stratified water column enough to initiate what is called a limnic eruption, a rapid self-reinforcing overturn in which rising CO2-saturated water depressurizes and releases more gas, accelerating the overturn in a cascade that within minutes converted the lake's dissolved gas reserves into a surface eruption. The CO2 cloud was denser than air. It flowed down the surrounding valleys as an invisible, odorless mass, displacing the breathable atmosphere at ground level across the valley system downstream. People were found exactly where they had been, in fields, at tables, in beds. No burns, no trauma, no external injuries of any kind. They had simply run out of oxygen. A continuous degassing system installed through international scientific cooperation in the years following the disaster slowly draws the deepest water upward through pipes, releasing accumulated CO2 at a controlled rate before it can reach dangerous concentrations. As of recent assessments, the system covers roughly 20% of the lake's total dissolved gas inventory. 3 other lakes in the Cameroon volcanic line, Manun, Kivu, and Boyo, have similar geological configurations. The Bikini Atoll. In March 1946, representatives of the United States government met with King Judea and the 167 inhabitants of Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. Commodore Ben Wyatt asked King Judah whether his people would be willing to leave their home temporarily so that the United States could test atomic weapons for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. King Judah consulted with his people. They agreed, believing the move was temporary and that they would be brought home when the tests concluded. They were relocated to Rouge Atoll, an uninhabited island with insufficient food resources. They were never permanently returned to Bikini. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States conducted 23 nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll, including Castle Bravo, on March 1, 1954, a thermonuclear device with a yield of 15 megatons, more than 1,000 times the destructive energy of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Castle Bravo was a miscalculation of the first order. The weapon's design assumed lithium-7 would be inert, but it proved to be a reactive fusion fuel contributor, driving the yield 2.5 times higher than the 6 megaton estimate. The fireball reached a diameter of 7 kilometers. The fallout cloud spread across 18,000 square kilometers of Pacific Ocean. The 23 crew members of the Japanese fishing vessel Daigo for Kuryu Maru, operating 150 kilometers from the detonation, were covered in radioactive fallout. The chief radio operator died 7 months later. The Marshallese population of Rouge Atoll, 150 kilometers to the east, was exposed to significant fallout for approximately 2 days before evacuation was ordered. Documents declassified decades later revealed that U.S. Stasis medical personnel were deployed to Rouge after the evacuation specifically to study the effects of radiation exposure on the Marshallese population, framing the monitoring program as research rather than treatment. Bikini Island's soil still contains cesium-137 concentrations above levels considered safe for continuous human habitation. The coconut crabs, which burrow deeply into the contaminated soil and concentrate radioactive isotopes in their body mass, cannot be safely consumed. The Mariana Trench. The Mariana Trench is a crescent-shaped convergence zone in the western Pacific Ocean, where the Pacific tectonic plate subducts beneath the Mariana Plate, dragging the seafloor downward at a rate of approximately 2 centimeters per year and creating the deepest sustained topographic depression on Earth's surface. At its deepest confirmed point, Challenger Deep, located at the southern end of the trench and first sounded by HMS Challenger in 1875, the seafloor lies approximately 11,034 meters below sea level. If you placed Mount Everest at that depth with its base on the trench floor, its summit would still be more than 2 kilometers below the ocean's surface. The hydrostatic pressure at Challenger Deep is approximately 1,086 bars over 1,000 times atmospheric pressure. At that pressure, water becomes measurably compressible. Its density increases slightly, and the propagation speed of sound changes. Temperature ranges between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius throughout the water column. Despite the crushing pressure, total absence of sunlight, near freezing temperatures, and distance from any nutrient-rich surface water, Challenger Deep is not empty and not sterile. Biological surveys conducted using deep submersible ROVs have collected amphipods, small crustacean scavengers, in concentrations dense enough to suggest a functional ecosystem supported by organic debris falling from the surface ocean. Xenophores, single-celled organisms capable of growing to 20 centimeters in diameter, making them among the largest individual cells known on Earth, had been documented at the bottom of the trench. Researchers have also found foraminifera, holothurians, and various polychaete worms. But the biology is not the most disturbing finding. A 2017 study published in Nature Ecology and Evolution analyzed the lipid chemistry of amphipods collected from multiple deep trench locations across the Pacific and found persistent organic pollutants, PCBs and PBDEs from industrial manufacturing, at concentrations 50 times higher than in organisms collected from rivers identified as among the most chemically contaminated in China. That's it for today. Subscribe for more, smash the like button, and drop a comment with your thoughts. I read every single one. Peace.